6-1, Mother. Everything I've done for you.
1000XRESIST is a game analyzing the effects of regime change through the context of a post-apocalyptic world and through the thematic lens of the Hong Kong protests of the 2010s. In the game, 7 regime changes happen, all of which add layers to the theme of oppressive regimes and how that makes people feel and act. The first is in the past. The parents of one of the main characters, Iris, participate in the Hong Kong protests when pro-Chinese legislators in Hong Kong tried to limit free speech, suppress dissent, and give mainland China more control. Hong Kong was a British colony from 1841 until 1997, when an agreement between the UK and China was reached. Over a period of 50 years, though China would own Hong Kong, their legal system would remain unchanged. Until 2047, Hong Kong would have its own government and laws. This was called One Country, Two Systems. Over the years, China has exerted more control, which led to the umbrella protests of 2014 and 2019, some of the largest in recent history. Iris's parents, fearing for their safety, eventually flee to Canada. The second happens when aliens descend upon the Earth and release a deadly disease into the air, killing everyone save a few who were mysteriously unaffected, including Iris. Only a few military groups scattered across the globe are left, one of whom convinces Iris to join them and conduct experiments to find a cure for the disease. Much of 1000XRESIST is an expression of how people with ties to Hong Kong felt the last 15 years, which includes COVID. The aliens descending and releasing a deadly disease into the air is, of course, a thematic tie to the global COVID-19 crisis. The third happens when Iris, in her growing hatred towards being used for experiments and being completely controlled, decides to strike a bargain with the aliens, giving her godlike powers. She uses these powers to kill everyone around her, leaving her utterly alone, a god in an empty world. The fourth happens when Iris decides to not be alone anymore, choosing to clone herself 5 times and live with her clones, to whom she did not bestow powers. This experience as a mother makes her distraught and exhausted over time, so much so that when one of her clones, named Youngest, attempts to please her mother by producing a botched clone of one of Iris's dead childhood friends, Zhao, Iris snaps, kills everyone but Youngest as punishment, and leaves to an undisclosed location. The fifth happens when Youngest, now alone, clones 5 Irises, gives them similar roles as the original 5 had, and renames herself Principal, making herself leader. She begins a cloning operation and creates a small enclave of clones in a very rigid social structure, and encourages a kind of religion toward Iris, who is now dubbed the All-Mother, where the religious terminology heavily used. The sixth happens when you play as Watcher, one of the roles of the original 5 clones, who discovers enough of the truth of why the world is how it is, later revealed to be Youngest manipulating Watcher into anger, that she is spurred on to find a way to the All-Mother, to Iris, and kill her. This destabilizes the order, allowing Youngest to create a new regime hateful of religion, religious phrases, and anything with even a subtext of spirituality. Yet curiously, and crucially to the theme, Youngest keeps the All-Mother as a holy symbol for control. She allows for Zhao clones to be created in a manipulative effort to seem progressive and open, unlike the old, supposedly rigid ways. The seventh happens when an Iris clone, Blue, also discovers the truth, and partners with a group of Zhao clones to complete the terrorist, or revolutionary, depending on the viewpoint, act of blowing up those in power, exposing the truth, and moving out from their underground enclave to the outside world to begin anew. The way in which these regime changes happen reflect the ways in which regimes execute control and manipulation, and how, eventually, a person or a group buckles under the pressure and fights back. Sometimes these are successful, sometimes not. Wise regimes know rebellion is inevitable, and so create ways to stymie them or use them for their own purposes, such as Youngest using Iris as a holy symbol, even though she hated her, quote, mother. Take, for example, Watcher, who killed the All-Mother. Though Watcher was successful, she was captured and used as a symbol of evil by Youngest to exert even more control over others. Or the Zhao clones, used by Youngest in an effort to look more progressive in allowing their existence, whereas Iris hated the idea of a Zhao clone. And the Zhao clones themselves, using the opportunity to slowly build a rebellion in the background. What interests me most is how different I felt when playing through Youngest's first regime, when Iris was still alive but living away from everyone else, and Youngest's second regime, once Iris was killed. Though both regimes forced a rigid way of thinking and acting, when Iris was still alive and her presence and reverence was everywhere, I felt quite comfortable and safe and full of life. Once she was killed and religious ways of speaking and acting were forbidden, things felt inhuman, hollow. The lack of spiritual inclination and daily spiritual phrases you encounter often before Iris was killed, Heki Almo, hair to hair, and so on, reminds me of China's Communist Revolution in 1966 and the erasure of the Four Olds. The Four Olds were described by communist revolutionaries as the pillars that were used to justify an abusive and unfair caste system. Old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits. For example, the cemetery where Confucius and some of his followers were buried was attacked and desecrated by Chairman Mao's Red Guard. And they nearly ransacked the Forbidden City, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was akin to the French Revolution, where the monarchy was toppled violently, heads were guillotined, and France saw what is called the Reign of Terror, a year of mass executions, political purges, and unrest. Anything that smacked of antiquated spirituality or monarchy was a target. Though indeed rulers throughout history have used religion, culture, and spiritual practices to justify control and atrocities, those things still have a human side to them. Humans are emotional, spiritual creatures. I began to love hearing hair to hair or telling my fellow sisters, Heki Grace. It was rigid and controlling, but it was still human. The characters often speak in a somewhat non-normative speech pattern and phrasing, which I grew endeared to as the game went on. Youngest's regime, however, looked to strip away the Four Olds in 1000XRESIST and replace it with phrases like, "Glory to the provisional government." Even though certain things in the game were more open, such as being able to read more books in the library, or when you play Blue, a clone that is not forced into a designated role but can choose for themselves, it all felt so hollow that I couldn't help but agree with Blue when she wanted to blow it all up. Even the contrast of feeling between cruel murder felt different. Iris's killing of the 4 original clones was horrific but felt human and understandable even though it was wrong. A god's wrath. Yet when Youngest, in her ongoing bid for control, murdered the mainstay character Bartender, who had helped you throughout the entire game, all for her so-called provisional government, it felt inhuman, and thus not just wrong, but evil. This speaks to how humans work on a core level. We aren't purely logical creatures. We crave to understand and utilize things emotionally. If you explore the philosophy of it, a purely logical creature doesn't exist because logic is just a tool, not an impetus to do something. You use logic to achieve a given end, but why you want that end is dictated by emotion. Logic can't tell you why you should want something. An example of this would be the philosopher David Hume's phrase, "You can't get an ought from an is." Another example would be the philosopher Schopenhauer elucidating this with his quip, "You can want what you want, but you can't choose what you want." This was in reference to his belief in the impossibility of free will, but used here it shows that you can't think your way into a core desire. And if you think you did, you would have to ask yourself what feelings and emotions are driving you to want to do that. Living in harmony means nothing if you strip the humanity away from it. In Iris's regime, there was at least emotion and humanity, even though it was rigid and controlling. However, I think then to North Korea, the regime which uses religious and spiritual imagery for control. Otto Warmbier, an American tourist to the North Korean capital of Pyongyang, was arrested in 2016 and sentenced to 15 years hard labor for supposedly taking a poster in his hotel that had the name of Kim Jong-il on it. He was released months later to the US in a vegetative state and shortly thereafter died. Or the undercover journalist who pretended to be an assistant to a medical doctor who traveled to North Korea to perform eye surgeries. The journalist secretly recorded her trip.
잘 보입니다. 네. 위대한 장군님의 덕분이구나. 우리 장군님께 근절을 드려한다. 우리 장군님 정말 고맙습니다. 이 자리에서 아버지 장군님께 감사 인사를 드리고 싶습니다. 위대한 영도자 김정일 원수님 정말 고맙습니다. 위대한 영도자 김정일 원수님 안돼.
In one sense, the comparison is splitting hairs. Totalitarian control is totalitarian control. It is interesting to feel out the difference, however. A false religion can create real emotion, but conversely, a sanitized society can feel less obtuse and thus subjectively less oppressive. Regarding the aliens and their thematic relationship with COVID-19, 1000XRESIST also gives the player an accurate level of fear about the alien's disease. Most of the world died because of it, and for the entirety of the game, everyone, save Iris, wears a mask. Characters throughout the game will speak about their masks, their fragility, and the worry of them slipping. During a supposed alien attack that shakes the compound you're in, some of the clones fall, break their masks, and die. One character accidentally trips someone else who cracks their mask and dies, and later in the game, you can find her. She is still traumatized by it and feels guilty. It is possible that the supposed alien attack was a fake, orchestrated by Youngest to accelerate her regime change using fear for more control. This reflects the confusion many had during COVID, that you were pressured to not question the narrative. I contracted COVID before vaccines were available. After recovering, I wondered if travel was possible due to, presumably, having natural immunity. The US at the time effectively denied natural immunity for COVID, saying there is no data yet to support natural immunity works. Natural immunity did not count toward your vaccination status. When exploring other countries' policies on the matter, I found that most of Europe readily accepted natural immunity, so much so that they would recognize it for foreigners who wished to travel there. All they needed was to have a positive COVID test no more than 6 months old. The stark difference between the US having a seeming scientific crisis over the concept of natural immunity, while Europe readily accepted it, was bizarre. Big Pharma, an evergreen target for suspicion and derision from the American political left, became their darling, not to be questioned about the record profits being made and if that is a conflict of interest regarding vaccine mandates. Whereas other countries without massive pharma companies buying out their government with lobbyists, interestingly recognize natural immunity. Regardless, 1000XRESIST shows us how a real crisis or danger can be used to tighten control. As has been said in various ways throughout history and for various reasons, never let a crisis go to waste. At the end of the game, you are tasked with choosing who will live and who will be eradicated in order to build the new world. The ending changes depending on your choice. It is a fascinating feeling when you are there, in the moment, looking at the broken pieces of a fallen society, wondering what and who should be forgotten. Revolutions always sound easy. Building a, quote, better society sounds easy. But when you are actually faced with the decision, there is a heaviness. You begin to see that leaving remnants of the old regimes can metastasize, and forcing everyone to get along as a solution is simply another regime, coercing everyone to stay in line. To move forward, something must be given up. To move forward, some have to die and be forgotten. The game gives you the power to make those choices, and when playing, I felt sickened. It reminded me of the end of World War II, when America executed Operation Paperclip, hiring former members of the Nazi regime for various US government projects, along with turning a blind eye to many Nazis fleeing to America. Was that corruption? Or was it necessary to subsume some of the poison into oneself so the immune system can filter it out organically over time? For example, in the 70s, the Office of Special Investigations was formed, its purpose to identify and either expel or bring to trial former members of the Nazi regime who were living in the US. Perhaps decades needed to pass before this routing could occur to stymie any sympathy that could bubble over into another regime. Perhaps not. Regardless, I spent a lot of time in that final area. In Hong Kong, more control has been exerted over it from mainland China. Dissenters have fled to other countries to be able to speak freely. Those in Hong Kong speak more carefully. Yet the shadows of the past, and the shadows of humanity, never leave and are never erased. They spur on those in Hong Kong to protest, spur on North Koreans to escape to the south, and spur on characters like Watcher and Blue to free the truth from the shackles of control, no matter the cost.